Inflation is cooling this Tuesday night. What could help keep consumer prices down, and fresh hopes for an interest rate cut.
It would really help the economy recover.
Smoke and fears, BC's early warning about wildfires, and how Canada's air quality rates worse than the U.S. What happened to Canada's promise to get relatives out of Gaza to Canada?
Death is all around them.
And Kate goes shopping.
Which will be nearly 4 months out of the public eye.
Is this glimpse of the princess quelling conspiracy theories?
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There's a bit of good news about the cost of living in Canada. The rate of inflation dipped last month, and though the cost of big things like rent and mortgages are still high, there are some positive economic signs. Here's a snapshot. Canada's annual rate of inflation slowed to 2.8% in February. That's down slightly from 2.9% in January. It is the first time since early 2021 inflation has been in the Bank of Canada's target range for 2 consecutive months. In our top story, Gaviola looks at what's behind that and what it could mean for interest rates.
All those interest rate hikes have helped cool the economy.
Consumers in Canada have been pulling back their spending on a lot of things. And that lack of demand is not enabling businesses to raise prices as much as they had been in the past.
Reflected in some lower prices in February. New cell phone plans plunged 26%. Clothing and footwear prices were down more than 4%. Airfares tumbled more than 5%. And it was the first month grocery food inflation was below overall inflation since October 2021, coming in at 2.4%. Economists say dampening consumer inflation expectations can help tame future price increases.
They see that grocery prices are not going up as quickly anymore. They see discounts and deals back in store, perhaps keep in control inflation expectations by consumers. And that, in turn, have inflation stay in moderation.
The proverbial thorn in the Bank of Canada's side, shelter costs. Mortgage costs remain stubbornly high, up 26% year over year, and rent inflation continues to soar. The Bank of Canada is widely expected to hold its benchmark interest rate at 5% in April, but with the economy flatlining, a cut by mid-year may be on the table.
A rate cut in June or sooner rather than later would really help the economy recover.
Energy prices may be the wild card. We're about to switch to summer gas, which is more expensive. Supply will also tighten as some refineries go offline for maintenance, while demand picks up with the warming weather.
I would expect broadly gas prices to likely continue rising in much of Canada through potentially Victoria Day before we start to see some improvement.
Anne is with me from Toronto. And rent and mortgage interest costs continue to be the main drivers of inflation and, of course, the major expense for most Canadians. Are there any signals about what's coming for those?
If you carve out those shelter costs, the Bank of Canada has already met its inflation target. But they're a huge challenge. Soaring demand has juiced rents across the country, and there are no signs that's letting up. And mortgage costs will come down if the central bank cuts interest rates. But as recent polling and history suggest, a clear sign will likely fire up the housing market and boost prices and activity. It is a conundrum. Donna?
Interesting. Anne Gaviola in Toronto. Thanks. Canadians have begun paying their last respects to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. His casket, draped in a Canadian flag, was carried by Mounties into the Sir John A. Macdonald building in Ottawa this morning. It's there that he will lie in state opposite Parliament Hill today and tomorrow. Mackenzie Gray has been speaking to people about why they wanted to pay tribute.
We're here today to honor the brilliant legacy of a great statesman.
We're going to miss him. He made an extraordinary difference for my community, but for the entire country.
Brian Mulroney's family greeting hundreds, including another former resident of 24 Sussex who served in Mulroney's cabinet. Joe Clark, Mulroney's external affairs minister, was central in their fight against apartheid in South Africa.
When you think back on it, for anyone to win 2 majority governments is remarkable. But then to have applied that capacity to so transform the country is really a tribute to his stamina.
But it wasn't just VIPs. A steady stream of Canadians came to remember the 18th Prime Minister.
I'm an immigrant to this country, and It is those forebears who have provided opportunities for people like us to be here.
The first person in line, one of Mulroney's former RCMP security officers.
I was strictly there to provide security, not to advise him in any way in his politics. Not necessarily in favor of a lot of what he did, but also in favor of some of the stuff he did.
Obviously, I didn't always succeed.
Mulroney did leave office deeply unpopular, and it was years before the Conservative Party recovered. Despite 13 years of Liberal rule after Mulroney, former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole praised the former Prime Minister for making tough decisions on GST and free trade.
The economy we have today really was set in motion almost 40 years ago by Brian Mulroney.
Mulroney will continue to lie in state here in Ottawa tomorrow, in advance of his casket going to Montreal, Donna, before his state funeral on Saturday.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. There's a dire projection of what's coming in Gaza. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says Israeli restrictions on the entry of aid may amount to starvation as a method of war, which is a war crime. And the U.S. Secretary of State said today no other place in the world is suffering the way Gaza is, where 2 million people don't have enough to eat.
100% of the population in Gaza is at severe levels of acute food insecurity. That's the first time an entire population has been so classified.
Acute food insecurity is when a person's inability to find adequate food puts their life or livelihood in immediate danger. It is the strongest statement yet from the U.S. on the scale of the crisis.
100%, the totality of the population, is in need of humanitarian assistance. Compare that to Sudan. About 80% of the population there is in need of humanitarian assistance. Afghanistan, about 70%. So again, this only underscores both the urgency, the imperative of making this the priority.
It's been more than 2 months since Canada's government launched a temporary visa program allowing Canadians with loved ones in Gaza to apply to bring them here. One Calgary man is trying to save his sister and her 4 young children, but he tells Heather Yourex-West Canada's visa process has stalled.
Born in terrible conditions inside a Rafah tent, Tamar Jarada's 1-month-old nephew is fighting to survive.
Adam now is in the hospital because of infections.
Welcome to Uridu. The number you are calling is currently unreachable.
It's the message Jarada hears most days when he tries to call Gaza. The last time he spoke with his sister, it was a harrowing call.
As always, she was crying, begging for help, and I was hearing the bombs around her tent in Rafah and her kids being scared.
The family has already been devastated by loss. Last October, an airstrike killed 17 family members, including Jarada's mom, dad, and 2 sisters. It's why the Calgary cancer researcher is now desperate to get his surviving sister and her family, along with his in-laws, to Canada. 16 of 18 family members have received initial approval for special temporary visas, and yet in Rafah they remain. According to Ottawa, there have been 986 applications for visas from Gaza, but among those who passed preliminary eligibility, only 14 have left the region to complete the necessary biometric step in Egypt, and each one did so on their own.
We obviously would prefer a more reliable way of getting a lot more people out, but I'm not going to blame people for shaking their lives in their hands and taking extraordinary measures to save their own people.
It's why Jarada is now looking to Egyptian operatives for help and turning online to crowdfunding to try and raise the staggering $160,000 required.
My biggest fear right now is that I won't be able to talk to my sister tomorrow.
For a grieving and terrified family desperate to bring their loved ones to safety, this, it seems, is the only option they have left. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
There's more fallout tonight from the passing of a watered-down NDP motion on Palestinian statehood in the House of Commons Monday. Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, one of 3 Liberals who voted against the motion, says he's considering his future in the party.
I started
reflecting as to whether or not I belonged. And I will let you know further how I feel over the coming days. For the moment, I'm still there.
The motion passed, but not until after the Liberals drastically altered its wording to say the government will work towards recognizing a Palestinian state as part of a two-state solution. House Father says there was not enough recognition of what he calls the existential threat Israel faces and the fears of Jewish Canadians. We've long prided ourselves on pristine air quality in Canada, but that is an outdated notion. A new report shows for the first time on record, Canada's air quality was worse than the U.S. in 2023. In its 6th annual World Air Quality Report, Swiss-based IQ Air named Canada the most polluted country in North America. And of the 15 most polluted cities in Canada and the U.S., 14 were in Canada. Most of them in the West. That's where wildfires burned the largest swaths of land. As Neetu Garcha reports, people in BC are already being warned to prepare for what could be another fiery and hot year.
With the sun shining bright on the cusp of spring, the season's promise of renewal is overshadowed by fears of drought and scorching heat, setting the stage for what could be another devastating wildfire season.
This is the earliest that we have begun press conferences cautioning British Columbians about the summer season.
With last year's wildfire season the most destructive on record, she's encouraging British Columbians to have an emergency plan in place.
Register for emergency support services but online now before the emergency actually happens so that you're ready to go and able to receive support if you need it.
Evacuation is something winery owner John Skinner has had to deal with.
It's a constant threat.
After a weekend of record-breaking temperatures in BC, Skinner is sharing his fears about the 2024 season.
In 2020, we had a very substantial fire right to the back of our property. And it's frightening because we've got such a small snowpack now.
The average provincial snowpack for March 1st was 66% of normal.
The concerns are echoed by fire officials in the province's Okanagan Valley, where crews responded to 2 new wildfires over the weekend.
As you can see here, there's snow all around us, but on this south-facing slope, it's really dry. It is drier than what it looks.
Targeted, temporary water restrictions may be needed again, but they are a last resort.
The province also announced an expansion of its use of enhanced technology to predict wildfire behavior, including infrared scanning, 5G technology, and drones.
We are the first and only standalone emergency management ministry in Canada for a province. This isn't about being scared, it's about being prepared.
Above normal temperatures across BC are expected in the coming months, and forecasters say the chance the province will see enough spring rainfall to alleviate drought conditions is possible, but unlikely. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Critics of a new national security law in Hong Kong call it Hong Kong's giant leap backward. Known as Article 23, it passed unanimously by the territory's pro-Beijing parliament, eliminating freedoms that distinguished Hong Kong from China. It establishes new offenses like external interference and insurrection. Human Rights Watch says even possessing a book critical of the Chinese government can violate national security and mean years in prison. Attempts to impose similar laws in the past were met with huge pro-democracy protests. Leaders of those protests have mostly been jailed or gone into exile. A question of identity coming up, why the Innu Nation is taking the federal government to court. Canada's Auditor General is frustrated, saying little has changed in the living conditions on First Nations in this country.
After 4 audit reports, I can honestly say that I am completely discouraged that so little has changed. Our audits of federal programs to support Canada's Indigenous peoples reveal a distressing and persistent pattern of failure.
Whether in housing, policing, or safe drinking water, she says there's been little progress. Karen Hogan says the number of First Nations homes needing to be repaired or refurbished was the same in 2022 as it was in 2015. The report found funding for policing and safer communities has significantly increased since 2014, but she says $13 million in the last fiscal year went unspent. Inuit and Innu organizations joined forces today in Ottawa, calling on the federal government to scrap a controversial agreement that gives 6,000 people in South and Central Labrador Indigenous rights. Critics argue the group is not entitled to those rights. As Abigail Beeman reports, they call them settlers who are fraudulently claiming to be Inuit.
From Shahaji, Natwashish, and Nunatsiavut in Labrador, all the way to Ottawa. More than 50 Innu wanted to be at a federal court case in person with the question of identity at the core.
This is a group of settlers pretending to be an Inuit.
The Innu Nation is taking the federal government to court, wanting a 2019 agreement signed with the Nunatukavut Community Council thrown out, arguing they aren't really Inuit.
I know who I am, and I know who our people are.
We know who we are. We know where we come from.
Former Liberal MP Todd Russell heads up the Nunatukavut Community Council. More than 6,000 people claim a large area of traditional territory in Labrador that overlaps with both Innu and Inuit land. They used to call themselves the Labrador Métis Association. Russell says he's confident in their case.
We have, for the last 30 years, been presenting evidence, reports, genealogy, archaeology, anthropology, sociology.
A number of groups are backing the Innu Nation, concerned about the impact if the government recognizes the Nunatukavut as Indigenous.
We are forced to fight fraudulent groups that Canada has empowered, and this was never part of the deal.
The right to self-identify as an Indigenous person should not be used as a tool to harm the rights and interests of First Nations by taking away rights and resources intended for the original stewards of these lands.
Russell says his people need housing and food security help and wants the government to come to the table.
We have many of our communities that are hanging by their fingernails. This is why we say to the federal government, ignore the BS, ignore all of these false allegations.
The federal court hearing continues Wednesday. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Surprise shutdown ahead, why Manitoba could face a fuel shortage. Winnipeggers are wondering if their fuel supply could soon run out. Imperial Oil shut down a pipeline on March 15th because of what the company calls integrity concerns. It supplies Winnipeg with gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel and will be out of service for 3 months. As Marnie Blunt reports, there doesn't appear to be a clear-cut solution.
It's an abrupt halt to the flow of fuel to Winnipeg. A major Manitoba pipeline now shut down for 3 months.
Almost everything in terms of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel is brought in via these pipelines.
Crews will be replacing a section of the pipe that runs underneath the Red River, south of Winnipeg, near the small rural community of St. Adolphe. Imperial Oil says no materials were spilled, but now the city is left with about a week's worth of supply.
I realize anything, a discussion around gas can cause people to get anxious. And we just simply don't have any reason to think anybody should. We're not. We're going to just kind of make our way through this.
Solutions include moving fuel by truck and train. But supply chain experts say those are all things that take time and money.
There's no way that they're going to be able to make it as sort of life as normal. There just simply isn't enough capacity, loading, unloading facilities, even available trucks and rail cars to be able to move everything that we're moving now. So there will be some reduction in supply.
The disruption will likely be reflected in prices at the pumps as well. Manitobans are being asked to moderate their gas consumption to avoid making a bad situation worse. Marnie Blunt, Global News, Winnipeg.
You've probably seen the latest video of Princess Kate. It's everywhere. She was spotted with her husband buying some groceries. No big deal, except because she hasn't been seen in public for a few months, it's creating quite a stir. And as Crystal Gamansing reports, it's doing little to silence the roar of conspiracy theories.
Both TMZ and the Sun newspaper have published what are believed to be the first images of the Prince and Princess of Wales in public since her abdominal surgery in January.
Even that photo in the paper, they've got nothing else to write about.
The royals, especially the next generation, sells papers, increase views, and people tend to take it all in. The woman who mused about the paper not having anything better to cover also said this.
Yeah, it's nice to see her. I'm glad she's in good health.
The Princess of Wales has been out of the public eye recovering, making the images of the future king and queen at the farm shop in Windsor near their home even more desirable. An official photo released of her and the couple's 3 children last week sparked controversy. International newswire agencies determined it had been edited, violating photo policies. Kate issued an apology, but memes and conspiracy theories flooded the internet about her health, her whereabouts, even her marriage. The palace originally said the 42-year-old would not return to public duties until after Easter.
This is now just such a huge thing. I don't see how they can wait that long, which will be nearly 4 months out of the public eye.
When royals aren't seen, the stories don't stop. They can, however, become more absurd. Russian state media channels recently falsely claimed the king had died. Multiple British embassies, including Ukraine's, issued statements saying the report was fake. Being part of the royal family comes with clear perks, but privacy isn't one of them. Crystal Gamanson, Global News, London.
And that's Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Jasper, Alberta. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.